Okay, in this section 6-6, we're looking at translations of sine and cosine. And so in the last section, we looked at the equation y equals a sine of bx, but this time we're just going to add a minus c to that and kind of talk about how that affects the graph. And when you do this, it creates horizontal translations, or we'll call them shifts, in the sine and the cosine curves. And so if you compare this equation with this one, then what you'll find is it completes one cycle, okay, from bx minus c equals 0 to bx minus c equals to 2 pi. And then by solving for x, you can find the interval for one cycle, right? When you guys are looking at this as far as the endpoint and the for the left and the right endpoint, as far as the shift is concerned, because when you shift it, then the endpoints are not going to be where they were at first. The period is still going to be the same given by this, okay, but the left endpoint and the right endpoint are going to be shifted. All right, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about here. So again, when you're looking at this, the amount that it's shifted by is going to be c divided by b. And then that number is called the phase shift. So when you're asked to find the phase shift, you're finding how much that curve or that graph is shifting by. And you can find it by doing c divided by b. Okay. Now this box just kind of gives you what we looked at last time, the amplitude and the period. Okay. And if you wanted to determine what the left and the right endpoints of one cycle are, then again you would solve these equations for x. So it's bx minus c equals 0, and it's bx minus c equals to 2 pi. All right. And so again, the key here and kind of the thing that's new here is the c divided by b in order to get the actual phase shift. All right. So let's look at the type of problems we're going to be looking at. It says find the phase shift and the vertical shift. Now, vertical shift we didn't talk about, but it's easy to find. It's the same way that you would find the vertical shift on any function that you've ever studied. It's by this number at the end. Plus is shifting vertically up, minus shifting vertically down. Okay, so no real change there. So let's find the phase shift first. All right, so remember the phase shift is going to be c divided by b. C divided by b. All right. And so when we go through and we are determining that, remember, here's the value of c, right? When you go in to plug that in, though, just remember, because of the way that this equation is written out, bx minus c, then whatever you're going to plug in for c, whatever is here, you got to change the value in order to make it work. So, like for example, this is a plus pi, right? And so I'm going to change the value or the sign of pi to minus pi. So that would be minus pi over my b value is 4. All right, so c over b. And again, the reason why the value of this is going to change when you drop it into the formula here is because of the fact that the general form for this equation is bx minus c. All right, bx minus c. So if there were a minus here, that's what the c would end up being. All right. So, like for example, on this one, okay, if I plug in negative pi, right, back into here for my c, if I plug in negative pi for my c, then this and that equation would end up being negative c, right? So in other words, right here, if I plug in negative pi, right, so negative and negative makes a positive, so then that would be bx plus pi. So in order to make this equation match as plus pi, negative pi has got to go in for my c. So it's bx minus negative pi. Negative and negative make it a positive. So as I was saying earlier, the quick way to think about that is you just change the sign. All right, if it's plus pi here, we'll change it to minus pi. If it's minus pi here, you'll change it to plus pi. To get it to match this equation correctly when you plug in a value for c is why that happens. All right, so that is your phase shift then. Now, we need to interpret that to a movement. Well, if it's minus, okay, if it's minus, then we're going to be moving it to the left. So since it's negative pi over 4, then that movement is going to be to the left, pi over 4 units. Alright, so that's the movement. That's the phase shift. Left pi over 4 units. Okay? So negative is movement to the left, and positive is movement to the right. Alright? Once you find the actual phase shift. Okay? Let's see. Other thing we need to find is the vertical shift. And remember what we said about vertical shift? Easy to find. Just look at this number. If it's -2, then that's going to be a shift of down 2. Alright? Okay, next one. Again, we want the phase shift. And so my phase shift here again is still going to be C divided by B, right? And so my C here at negative pi over 3, we'll drop that in as a positive pi over 3. Because remember that sign has got to change to make the equation right. Over B, B is 2/3. And so now we begin to simplify. When you're dividing fractions, you want to multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator. 2/3 flips to 3 over 2. And the 3's cancel out, which means I'm going to be left with pi over 2. And so I need to now relate that to a shift left or right. Since it's positive, we're going to say that shift is going to be to the right by pi over 2. Shifts to the right by pi over 2. We also need the vertical shift. And so when we're looking at this, there's nothing that's added or subtracted to the very end. So as far as a vertical shift, then there is none. Or you could say it's 0 if you wanted to. Okay. All right, one more to take a look at here. Again, we want the phase shift. Okay, and phase shift, once again, is going to be C over B. Okay, so my C here, now you've got to be careful because remember, the B is attached to the X and the C, right, is just going to kind of be by itself. Well, again, we're going to have to change the sign of this to a negative, so that'd be negative pi over, now what's the value of B? The value of B is actually negative here as well, so that's -2, so both of those are negative, and when that simplifies, that's going to simplify out to pi over 2, positive pi over 2, negative and negative makes a positive, and a positive value there when you divide your C by B indicates that that's going to be a movement to the right, a shift to the right by pi over 2 units. Okay. And let's see, what else do we need to look at here? We need to look at the vertical shift of this thing, and that's going to be up by 6. Okay, so again, this one is kind of tricky. Number one is because these two terms are switched around. Remember, the B is always attached to the X, and the C is always by itself without an X, right? So it's not tied to the position, whichever one comes first or second. It's tied to the variable as to which one is B and which one is C. So keep that in mind. So they shifted that on you. And so, and it's also kind of tricky because the C value was negative and the B value was negative. And so when that's the case, though, negative and negative divides to make a positive, which is going to cause a shift over to the right. All right, so just be careful of all of those things when you're going through and looking at this, and should be ready for your quiz.